When you practice homeopathy, you are practicing in complete consistency with the microbiome. Almost everything that's done conventionally in medicine messes up the microbiome. Almost everything that's done is disruptive to the microbiome, and it leads to chronic health problems. And that's what we're seeing today in medicine. The more medicine you do, the more chronic your illness, and the harder it is to dig yourself out of a hole. And we can understand the basis of why homeopathic medicines work, because they're not working against these intrinsic processes in the body, the immune system.
So for homeopaths learning more about the microbiome, I mean, what sort of resources do you recommend, or what sort of other information do you think we need to know? What do we need to be aware of? Like, can we just use our bowel noses? Do you think a good constitutional remedy can rebalance the microbiome by itself, like practically in clinic? What do you think we should be aware of?
I like this question because I think for so long I wasn't clearly communicating this answer. And the answer to that question is...
So you may have noticed over the years that I tend to not read out a guest's entire bio at the start of the episode, because I figure you're listening to this podcast because you just want to jump in and get as much value as you can and learn as much as you can. And I figure if you listen to a guest, you really like what they're saying, you resonate with them, you are just going to go Google their name, find them online anyway, and go from there. But today's a little bit different. I had the huge privilege of interviewing Dr. Ronald Whitmont, and his resume is so absolutely mind-blowingly incredible that I just have to take a moment to read it out to you, and I'm sure you will appreciate what this man has done over the years if you just have a listen. So here we go. Ronald D. Whitmont, MD, is a second-generation homeopathic physician practicing classical homeopathy in Rhinebeck, New York. He was raised in Westchester County, New York, and graduated from Hampshire College, where he majored in interdisciplinary studies of biology and psychology. He completed a senior honors bachelor's thesis on the treatment of mental illness in young adults at a residential treatment center in Connecticut. Ron went on to study medicine and received his MD from SUNY Health Sciences Center at Brooklyn. He completed his medical internship at St. Vincent's Hospital and Medical Center in Greenwich Village, New York, before working for the U.S. Navy as a general medical officer. He completed his residency in internal medicine at the Reading Hospital and Medical Center in West Reading, Pennsylvania, and was board certified by the American Board of Internal Medicine. He became a founding diplomat of the American Board of Integrated Holistic Medicine and has spent time working in rural medical clinics both in India and at the Pine Ridge Indian Health Services Hospital in South Dakota. He is a former president of the American Institute of Homeopathy, America's oldest extant national medical association, and the Homeopathic Medical Society of the State of New York. He served as clinical assistant professor of family and community medicine at New York Medical College, where he taught third and fourth year medical students the essentials of complementary, alternative, and integrative medicine with a focus on homeopathy. He is currently president of the National Homeopathic Product Certification Board, a trustee of the AIH, and medical advisor to the consumer group Americans for Homeopathy Choice. He has published articles and lectured in the US and internationally across a range of topics, including homeopathy, Lyme disease, lifestyle medicine, and the human microbiome. He is an avid fan of organic, biodynamic, and sustainable community-based agriculture. Wow. This will just give you a tiny little bit of a taster of the incredible interview you are about to listen to. Dr. Ron, thank you so much for all the work that you've done in homeopathy, and thank you for sharing your time with us today. Enjoy the episode.
Welcome to the Homeopathy Hangout Podcast, where we discuss all things homeopathy from around the world. And now our mum and your host, Eugenie Kruger.
Hello, homies, and welcome back to Homeopathy Hangout. Now, today we have a very special guest for you, Dr. Ronald Whitmont. Welcome to the show, Ronald.
Thank you very much, Eugenie. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, before we started, I was just saying to you, when I have a guest like you on the show that's been working in homeopathy for so many decades and has done so much work for our profession, it almost feels to me like an insult to just ask you for an hour of your time, because we're not even going to scratch the surface of everything that you've done for homeopathy, but we're going to make a really good crack at it today. I have so many questions lined up for you, But, my question I ask all my guests is how they first discovered homeopathy. Now, many people will know a little bit about your story, but I would love to hear how you first discovered homeopathy.
Sure. Well, I came from a very unique household, and I grew up in New York State in Westchester County in the 60s and 70s. And my father, both my parents were psychotherapists. My father, a Jungian analyst, and my mother, a Gestalt therapist. And my father was a homeopath, and he came over from Austria at the end of the Second World War, and was an anthroposophical physician, and later discovered homeopathic medicine in New York City. And he started out as a family practitioner and then became more and more interested in the mind, and eventually went into the analytic psychology. But in the meantime, he treated our whole family using homeopathic medicine. And I never saw a pediatrician in my life growing up. I never saw a kind of a doctor from the regular school until I sprained my wrist and went to the emergency room, to get an x-ray. So that's how I was introduced to medicine. To me, homeopathy is just medicine. And I struggled over a few years after, high school and college. Do I go into medical school? I knew I wanted to be a homeopath, but the question is how to do that. And I knew that there were, kind of routes that were sort of just pure homeopathy or doing the hardcore medicine stuff first. And I decided that that was the most important for me, to really base homeopathy on a foundation of medical science. And I knew that if I came at it from that side, I'd have a grounding in everything that I was doing homeopathically. I knew it was going to be a conflict in many respects, and I knew that my colleagues and peers in medical school were not going to want to hear about anything homeopathic, and it was an exercise in keeping my mouth shut for 4 years of medical school and another 3 years of residency after that, where I couldn't think it, feel it, breathe it, or practice it. And then
Wow.
I had also the opportunity of working in the United States Navy as 4 years as a medical doctor, where I also couldn't use homeopathy at the time. So I really felt I got my grounding in it. But I knew from the start when I was going to medical school that this is where I wanted to end. This is where I really wanted to start the practice of medicine, was in homeopathy.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you brought in the Navy, because one of my questions I was going to ask you is if you were able to bring any homeopathy into the Navy, or was it very much strictly keeping the
Yeah,
homeopathy to the side?
I wish I could have. That's the thing about conventional medicine, is they keep you so busy doing. You're always understaffed. You always have more things to do and less time to do it. And they want more and more out of you, that you never have a chance, even if you were completely facile in using homeopathy, which I was not. It would be a challenge to practice it. And then, of course, you'd have to go through the whole process of getting informed consent and permission to use it. So the answer, unfortunately, is no. But it reflects really negatively on the profession today, that physicians still don't have time to really look into any alternatives to what they do. They're so busy and they're just fighting burnout all the time that there's not a moment in their day to learn something new. And this is
Mm,
a real problem with the system.
mm. Is that where you got your love of exercise from? Because I think you're quite a unique homeopath in that you don't just do the remedies, but it sounds like you really focus on exercise and diet and lifestyle and all the other things as well, which I think sometimes us homeopaths don't focus enough on that side of things as
Hmm.
well.
Yeah, it's funny. I never thought of myself as being different as a homeopath in that sense, but you may be right, because I do, even though I'm taking a homeopathic history in my interviews, I'm also getting information on lifestyle and diet and different things that people are doing and their psychological health. More than just looking for the remedy, I'm often trying to find ways that will also support the homeopathic treatment. So I feel that, as Hahnemann said, you have to remove the obstacles to health if you're going to create solid and durable improvement. So for me, that's really part of getting treated is you have to be able to give people something they can take in their hands and do. I remember in the early years when I first started practicing, I would just take their history, give a medicine, and then say, okay, come back and see me. And they'd be like, well, what? You spent this much time with me and you're giving me this one little powder, and what am I supposed to do? So I also realized that if I can empower people and give them a way of participating in their care, it's not trivial at all. It's sometimes it's the most important thing that I can do. Other times it works in combination with homeopathy, and sometimes it's just the homeopathy that's doing it. So it varies so much, and every person I see, it's a different combination of the above.
Mm. You just quickly mentioned about your dad being a Jungian analyst, but I have just found out yesterday that your dad actually knew Carl Jung and opened the Jung Institute in New York. So there's a little bit more to the story that you're going to have to give us.
There is. I tend to specialize in trying to synopsize as little briefly as I can. But yes, my father corresponded initially with Carl Jung from New York when I don't know the exact history, whether I believe my father entered psychotherapy for himself. He was a patient and he went through analysis. And at some point, he corresponded with Carl Jung and wanted to meet him. And one of the things, he's got some really interesting stories about meeting Carl Jung. One of them was that the guy presented to himself to my dad as a total kind of slob. When they met, he was like covered with dirt from the garden, and it totally relaxed my dad. So he was, feeling like, this is just a man. It's not a god. It's not a giant necessarily. It's just a man. But he brought to Carl homeopathy, and he said, you really need to know about this and you need to incorporate this in your work and your writing. And Carl Jung said back to my dad, no, that's going to be your mission, not mine. That's what you have to do. And so that, I think, really, my father took that to heart, and thus he was writing and publishing talks and lectures. And that eventually formed the first book that he published, which was, no, this is the second book he published, but it was Psyche and Substance.
Psyche and Substance, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other one, remind me the name of the other book? Something
Well,
about
so
healing.
he had 4 books altogether.
Oh, 4.
The first, The Symbolic Quest, and that is essentially transcriptions of the teaching lectures he provided at the Jung Institute in New York City. So that goes through, it's basically a primer in analytic psychology. I don't think he mentions homeopathy anything other than in passing. But the second book is Psyche and Substance, which is, I think it's essays in homeopathy in light of Jungian psychology or something like to that effect. And that was a collected series of papers that he had published looking at different remedies and reflecting back on work in analytic psychology. He also published a book called The Return of the Goddess, which is about, it's been so long that I read, I shouldn't say anything what it is. Probably get it wrong. And then another one called The Alchemy of Healing.
That's what I was thinking of, yeah.
Yeah, that was the last book he wrote. And before that was Dreams, A Portal to the Source. And that's much more on the psychological analysis of dreams.
Oh, interesting. Do you sell the books as well? Because I found them on Amazon, but is that just the best way to get Edward Whitmont's books? Yeah. Okay. No, that's
the best way.
Okay. Now I always double check because sometimes, the authors don't actually get anything or the living people after that. So I just always double check where the best place is to write. I like that you put that bit in because I read an article that Dana Ullman wrote and he did say that, your dad said that he did tell Carl Jung about homeopathy. So he did know about it.
Yes, that's true.
I mean, can you tell us a little bit more? What was it like growing up in a household like that? And your mum was a Tai Chi instructor as well. I mean, you probably wouldn't have known any different, but did you feel like different to your friends, like growing up in this household where you're getting exposed to all these different way of thinking and being?
Well, remember, this is also the 1960s. And so the point at that point was to be different. And I had very long hair. I was the first in my school to have very long hair, or one of the first. And
we want to see photos.
They're there, but you won't see them once you find them online somewhere. But yeah, it was, obviously I had very little to compare it to because I grew up in my family, not in anyone else's. But I'll tell you, I remember inviting my friends over for dinner at times because I wanted them to experience what I got every night, which was when we engaged my father in conversation, he would just spill out information, whether it was about history or religion or medicine or science. I mean, the man was, you could ask him anything, and he would have factual information. He would have esoteric information. He would have just kind of new age ways of thinking. We were talking about books like Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, in 1965. We were talking about the Findhorn Garden and the spirit entities that they were using to grow food in Scotland. We were talking about the information that plants give us and the emotional life of plants. So, yeah, I think I had a bit of a different childhood.
Slightly different.
To me, it was like gobble up as much as you can
Mm.
and imbibe as much of this information. And I just ate it up. I was so interested in finding out. And it made kind of regular school a little difficult because I didn't really see the point of that. But as I said, I'd invite my friends over. It's like, just ask him a question. Ask him anything you want, and they would be like, "Well, we can't talk about that at the dinner table," That was weird.
Amazing. Do you know how your dad discovered homeopathy? Like, what was his journey into it?
Well,
Even?
he, as I said, he's worked with Carl Koenig, the anthroposophical physician, the founder of the movement in anthroposophical medicine. And this was right out of medical school in Vienna. And he worked in Carl Koenig's clinic in Vienna. And my dad was a complete convert to anthroposophical medicine. And when he arrived in the United States under difficult circumstances, but he finally got established as a practitioner in New York City and was practicing anthroposophical medicine. And he met Elizabeth Wright Hubbard, a practicing homeopath, and he was very impressed by her. And I guess in their conversations, he said, "You should learn this anthroposophical stuff because it's really wonderful." And she said, "No, no, 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 no. You should learn homeopathy." And they argued about it. And finally, somehow they decided to swap their most difficult cases. And when she took on his most difficult cases and cured them, he started studying homeopathy. And he never went back to anthroposophical medicine after that.
Wow. I love these little side stories. It's so fascinating for me. But speaking of not going back to medicine, am I understanding it correctly that you're not practicing internal medicine at all? Like you only practice homeopathy?
That's correct.
Because that's
I've
pretty
been,
hardcore, like going through all that training and then only being, no, I think it's the best job in the world and probably one of the highest callings, but
yeah.
choosing after all that hard work to only practice homeopathic medicine. I mean,
Oh,
that says
yeah.
a lot.
And homeopathy is so easy to practice too. It's just so, it's like a vacation.
I hope you're
What are you
sarcastic.
talking
'Cause
about?
it's not-
No, no.
no.
Yeah, the internal medicine, all the medical training was hard work, of course,
Yeah.
but it was never left behind in the sense that everything I learned is still practically useful.
Yeah.
I do not employ conventional medical therapeutics except under extreme conditions or at the very last choice out of my toolbox. I am pretty much 99% homeopathic medicine and classical homeopathic medicine, but that's the hardest thing I've ever practiced. That's much harder than practicing conventional medicine. Conventional medicine is like following a cookbook.
Yeah.
You literally open the book to the page where the diagnosis is, and you select what medicines you can use, and you pick one. And homeopathy, I wish it was so easy to practice. It is so difficult. And so medicine is like the fallback
Mm.
because it's really hard to practice homeopathy. Now, maybe and I've been practicing for 30 years, I still find it challenging.
Mm.
So there's certainly some things get easier and some things do not.
Now, very interestingly, also, I think I read, I have to go look it up here, that you are a director of the 4th-year clinical elective at New York Medical College in complementary alternative and integrative medicine and clinical assistant professor as well. So it sounds like am I understanding correctly that you're teaching homeopathy to like medical students? As in
Well,
whoever wants to choose
yes.
as an elective? Is that right?
Yes. I no longer direct that elective, but I did direct it from 2008 until COVID, till around 2022. And then New York Medical College booted us out
Mm.
because of politics there.
Mm.
Um, But you were going to ask me something. Yes, we were teaching medical students who were interested in it, homeopathy. It was part of a third-year elective, actually a third-year required lecture that they had to have. And then as a fourth-year elective that they could do for an entire month. They could sit into different homeopaths' offices and also other practitioners of complementary and alternative medicine. And they'd sit right there and they'd see the cases. And they were always coming back in their course comments that they so enjoyed the homeopathic side of it and they wanted more of that. And the problem was always, we just don't have enough practitioners to
Mm.
teach it.
Wow, how interesting that I mean, one, that it was a requirement in the 3rd year, but how great that they had that opportunity to be exposed to that. That's pretty
Yes.
cool. Amazing.
Yeah, they were great.
Yeah. Now, there's a couple of other things that I was really excited when I heard you talking about the microbiome and homeopathy, because when I started getting into, I mean, I got taught about bowel nosodes in 2011 when I was doing my studies, 2010, but I didn't quite understand them. And it wasn't until I did a bowel nosode lecture with Hilary Dorian through the Center of Homeopathic Education that I'm like, this stuff is amazing. So that was probably 2019. And I use them with almost all my clients. And I've, really, a lot of it makes sense to me that it all starts in the gut, or a lot of it starts in the gut, and that we can use homeopathic medicines to kind of, alter that relationship. But it was exciting to hear you talking about it, especially because you have the medical background as well and the homeopathic background. And when you do talks, you reference a lot of the medical literature to inform your homeopathic, kind of confirm also in a way what you're already doing in homeopathic practice, but just showing that there is stuff in the literature to back us up. Talk to us about the microbiome and homeopathy, and for the homeopaths listening, especially what they need to know about this homeopathic tool that we have in our hands that we're probably underutilizing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Well, so the microbiome, first of all, I think is one of the most exciting things in medicine today, and particularly in homeopathy, because we've kind of gone full circle in terms of the way that conventional medicine has gone, pushing against homeopathy and going to quote unquote scientific medicine has brought them to the most cutting edge field of medicine today, conventionally, which is the microbiome science. And this is using the most sophisticated tools of gene sequencing technology, high-speed data processing to identify all of these organisms that live in and on the human body. And everyone says what you said initially is like, it's in your gut. It turns out it's not just in your gut. It's literally in every single organ of your body, including your brain. It's present at conception, and it is throughout the entire fetal development period. The microbiome is incorporated into fetal development. And so all of a sudden you have this sort of concrete model that Hahnemann described, an invisible force or an invisible entity that's present everywhere in the body and that is functioning autonomously. And that's what the microbiome is. That's what we've discovered is the microbiome. The microbiome has this network of communication. It involves multiple different species of organisms, everything from viruses, bacteria, archaea, fungi, that are part of an ecology or an ecosystem that is literally everywhere. And what's so interesting about it is that probably the main thing we have learned is that almost everything that's done conventionally in medicine messes up the microbiome. Almost everything that's done is disruptive to the microbiome, and it leads to chronic health problems. And that's what we're seeing today in medicine. The more medicine you do, the more chronic your illness, and the harder it is to dig yourself out of a hole. Now, we conventionally have just been blaming patients for their illnesses for so long. That you did something wrong, you did this wrong, you're a smoker, your lifestyle is not good. When in fact, we're now seeing evidence that those are minor details compared to the impact of conventional drugs on the microbiome. And you can look at studies done in utero, during pregnancy, and in the first year of life, that when these children or these fetuses are exposed to conventional medicines, the impact is devastating. And it impacts everything from brain development to nervous system to immune system development. And you can count off the direct relationships between those exposure to these drugs, the number of exposures, and the risk of developing things like asthma, allergies, inflammatory bowel disease. And it goes on and on. It really covers the whole gamut of illnesses that we are faced with on epidemic proportions today. So I find this really exciting in my practice and in my research, because we're looking at the science that's generated by conventional medicine, and it is absolutely damning when it comes to conventional medicine itself. And even though everything is written and it's been published and the research continues to explore this and expose this, it's not reaching the public's ears. That they are still being told the old lie that they are the primary problem in their own health care, and they're the biggest obstacle that doctors face, which is malarkey. So I love the parallels. And when you really tunnel down into what we're learning about the microbiome, it mirrors the principles of homeopathy. You go from ecosystem science, you go to the law of similars, you go to, you can find examples of all this in the microbiome. So I find that really exciting. And my inclination or my belief is that microbiome science is really a very pure science. And what Hahnemann did clinically was one of the most pure sciences. I mean, he looked clinically without influencing with his bias, without telling philosophically or deciding in a premeditated fashion what should happen or what we should do. He listened to the way the body behaved. And he recorded in such detail that he could figure it out that this principle of similars was effective. This is what we're seeing in microbiome science. And so it just lights my fire when I can find these parallels between pure research science and homeopathy. Not to prove that it works, because no one has gone in that direction yet, but to say everything that Hahnemann has been saying, everything that homeopaths have been saying for the last 230 some years is consistent with the science of health. And that brings us to, we're learning that the way we treat conditions by, antipathic treatment of suppression and covering up symptoms, that is also damaging. And that it is, it's so suppressing, but now you can understand the basis of it. And we can understand the basis of why homeopathic medicines work, because they're not working against these intrinsic processes in the body, the immune system. Conventional medicine is completely about stopping the immune system from doing what it does.
Yeah.
And sidelining the immune system. And even when they're treating infections where that's what the immune system is supposed to do, they try to sideline the immune system by giving steroids to suppress it. I mean, it's gotten to the point where conventional medicine is so anti-health. I find it nauseating. And when I talk to people in my office who have been through conventional treatments, it's so hard to not get angry knowing what we know and knowing the science and knowing that there's no good evidence for what is being done conventionally in most cases. And it's purely, they're in a state of panic and they're thrashing around in the water, not knowing what else to do. And this is making people more and more ill. And it's a self-propagating process. And it is purely, we're seeing a purely iatrogenic or a physician-caused epidemic right now of illness. It's very discouraging.
Well, your interview is coming right off the back of me interviewing Vivek Patala this morning. His daughter has been healed from autism with homeopathy, but he tells exactly that story of how it was the vaccine, and then she had this medication, then she had some antipsychotics for her OCD, and then she had Provera to help with her PCOS, and how she kept on regressing and getting sicker and sicker. And we've just had exactly that discussion, and it becomes such a mess. But then also how unbelievable our bodies are at healing when it's given the right tools, because once he discovered homeopathy and started using that trajectory ended up getting changed. But, all of us homeopaths see that in our clinics daily of the damage that, pharmaceutical medication does. And look, it has its place, but mostly in emergency medicine, I would say. And I'll always be grateful for the surgeons who removed my appendix when it ruptured 4 years ago. Otherwise, I would be dead right now. So it's not saying it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can work together, and just giving our bodies a chance to heal instead of suppressing every single symptom. I mean, I was surprised when I opened up a Merck manual a few years ago, and it actually said there that it does not recommend antipertussives for coughs. And so it's even in the Merck manual, it's saying don't use a cough suppressant. Your body needs to get it out. So it's there in the mainstream medical literature, but that's not the message that gets given to the public, which is unbelievably frustrating.
It doesn't reach the practitioners. It's very frustrating. And it's happening not just in the most severe cases. We're not just talking about, autism is a pretty extreme condition, but it's happening in the treatment of the most routine things. And I had someone in my office just today, in fact, who was being treated with steroids for a cough. And it was like, you've got to be kidding me. And this is now becoming a routine practice. Like, they don't know what else to do. And so they're throwing the most major drugs and weapons at these things. But, I just also wanted to say, homeopaths were kind of ridiculed from the start for what they did and how they did it. And this idea of there's nothing in your medicine, and where we have, we meaning conventional doctors, have strong drugs and, powerful agents to fight this and to fight that. And we were being ridiculed for working with nature or working with the fundamental properties of the body. And it seems like it's had to come around 360 degrees before, well, where does working against nature get us? And what does it do to the environment? And what does it do to the body? What does it do to the microbiome? We're learning the hardest possible way that Hahnemann was right. And that if you don't work with nature, you will destroy yourself in the process. And he saw this. He wrote about this.
So for homeopaths learning more about the microbiome, I mean, what sort of resources do you recommend, or what sort of other information do you think we need to know? What do we need to be aware of? Like, can we just use our bowel nozzles? Do you think a good constitutional remedy can rebalance the microbiome by itself, like practically in clinic? What do you think we should be aware of?
I like this question because I think for so long, I wasn't clearly communicating this answer. And the answer to that question is homeopaths are already doing the right thing. And the microbiome is actually showing us, it's a confirmation that the homeopathic approach is the right approach, that by fully taking a case and by treating with the indicated medicine, that's the right thing to do. And that provides the greatest possibility of recovery. Sure, when the well-indicated medicine and the constitutional medicine and the acute medicine don't work, and that happens, then we look deeper and we can look at the bowel nosodes. You can look at doing detoxification from a vaccine or from some other exposure. And you have so many tools, whether you're using homeopathy or isopathy or organ drainage. There are so many tools and so many ways in the homeopathic method that are effective. And I don't know one that's the best, because it depends upon the case that you're working with. And even when you think this should be a straightforward case, it rarely is. And you've got to come around it from different angles and look at it. And I think that's just, unfortunately, we're seeing so many mangled cases come to our offices. And I think COVID really, really amplified that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I've only been in practice since 2012, 2013, and I've seen a change just in since COVID for sure. But somebody like yourself that's been in practice for 30 years, I'm sure you've seen even more changes as the vaccine schedule has increased, and now with COVID. And it's not just the vaccines. It's not just that, but it is a lot of the medications that's given without any thought, like, round and round of antibiotics for an ear infection, and all of the preventative medications in pregnancy and birth as well. In the birth room, there's so many unnecessary drugs that's given in the name of protecting the mum and baby. But actually, if they just trusted the woman's body and knows that, really, there's only 5% of women that probably are going to have issues in childbirth. And so I think a lot of what should be used as a final resort is used in the first instance. And that's what's causing a lot of damage. And if we're actually just using natural means as a first resort and leaving the heavy guns for, a last resort, that would help a lot.
It's funny that you should mention, pregnancy. I saw this remarkable movie last night. It had nothing to do with homeopathy. It had to do with delivery. And I think it was called something like Orgasmic Delivery or Orgasmic.
There is an orgasmic birth?
Orgasmic
birth. Yeah.
I was totally broken up by this film. It was totally powerful. But again, everything we seem to touch with conventional medicine just goes to crap.
Yeah.
It just gets worse and worse and worse. And we get in there and start intervening, and it goes to shit. And this is it's not in one particular field, it's across the board. And, the funny thing is, maybe it's not funny at all, but COVID, and many of my colleagues agree with me, COVID was the easiest thing I ever treated in my entire career as a homeopath. I treated COVID most of the time without opening the repertory, without even opening the book. I treated it because people were coming to me saying I had COVID, and I looked at them like, okay, you have the flu, and I'm going to treat you as if I'm treating anyone else who has the flu. And I'd had no significant complications from doing that. And almost everyone would recover within days. And these are people with complicated medical problems and not complicated conditions. And so it was baffling to me how there became such fear and such a huge shutdown of society based upon one of the easiest things I've ever treated. And granted, when I had COVID, which I had multiple times, it did take finding the right medicine, and I got better rapidly. And then every time I had it afterwards, it became less and less and less intense until it was a sniffle. So it seems like we're so good conventionally at taking something that's very straightforward and making it complicated.
Catastrophizing it, hey?
Scaring the daylights out of everyone around so that they are afraid to not use medicine, when it is conventional medicine that is the thing they should be most scared of. And it is completely turned on its head.
It's just sad that we've lost so much of our trust in our own bodies. I think one of the biggest gifts that we can give to our children, especially, and something that I teach my kids always, they're 14 and 11 and two of the healthiest kids you'll ever meet because, they've been treated with homeopathic medicine, born at home. It's been really beautiful. So it's to just trust our bodies. And that's the one thing I always feel like we can just get women, especially to trust their bodies. And then when that birth process goes well, you have a confident mum, you have that hormonal cascade. Then when somebody tells her, inject this thing into your baby, her intuition kicks in and she goes, no, that doesn't feel right for me. She doesn't. If we can just trust our bodies again and not operate from this place of fear, I think that would help a lot. But
You're so right.
When you say these things, Ron, I think it's important for people to understand that you go back to the medical literature, because I watched this incredible talk and I just want to urge our listeners you can go and find it on YouTube. You did this talk for the Canadian Coalition for Homeopathy and it was on pain and homeopathy. And you put a whole bunch of conventionally agreed upon narratives, tipped it right on its head, including, rice. So rice, compression and elevation. And that's what I've done that. I'm sure 95% of the population have been told that rice is what you do after an injury. You rest it. And, for burns, you put cold water on a burn. And if you have pain, you use an anti-inflammatory. And you use the medical literature to throw all of these conventionally held beliefs on their head. And so I really feel this is an incredible hour and a half talk that everyone, medical doctors included, and especially homeopaths, anybody just at home, if you deal with injuries or inflammation or pain, has to go and watch, because you go back to the medical literature, you pull that out, and then you bring homeopathic, things that Hahnemann has said for 250 years we should do. You bring that in there as well and show how homeopaths have been doing the right thing kind of all along. I would love if you could do that whole hour and a half talk again right now. And I know that talk in itself, you actually cut down quite a lot. So the talk was actually much longer. You had to take a lot of stuff out of the talk to keep it down. So there's more there. We can't do that whole talk now. I would love to. But can you maybe just give us a little bit of a taster of some of that? Because we can't just leave our listeners with this bomb and then just leave them there. So I feel like we need to tell them just a little bit more on that.
Sure. Well, I think you did a great job summarizing it. But yeah, this was the talk I gave to the Canadian College of Homeopathic Medicine. I also refined it, even a little bit more and gave it to University of Connecticut Health Center, which is part of the UConn system, or, U Connecticut system. That was this October, just passed in 2025. And there were faculty members from their medical school and their, departments in the background nodding when I was giving this talk. So to me, that, told me that I had gotten through to some of them at least. But essentially, the talk is about, first of all, you really can't ignore the microbiome anymore when you're talking about health. We've done it for so long, and this is where it's gotten us. This is by completely ignoring the ecology of the body. The second is that the microbiome is really affected by everything we do. I went on to talk about treatment of injuries, sprains, strains, soft tissue injuries, and specifically not only about the rice protocols, but also about the effects of things like anti-inflammatory drugs, steroid drugs, and antibiotics, and opioids, and not only how they impact the microbiome, but how they damage the response to inflammation, which is part of the body's way of healing, and how they interrupt and delay healing, and how they damage things like mitochondria, which are the organelles inside our cells, which are related to the microbiome. Because mitochondria they have their own DNA. They came from an ancient bacterial infection. They are part of the microbiome. And most conventional drugs interfere with them. And this is a problem. So looking at things like the rice protocols, as you said, the first is rest, and studies published in the New England Journal of Medicine demonstrate that the less rest you give someone after an acute injury, the faster their recovery. So that when you start at day 2 rather than day 7, you shorten their recovery time by 50%. And that's looking out 6 to 12 months later, those people who exercised sooner and got back to their activity recovered in half the time, just by waiting 7 additional days. And then ice, of course, directly interferes with the inflammatory pathways. It slows down circulation. And when you have an injury, you want circulation. You want to bring in cells that are going to be repairing the tissue, that are going to be infiltrating the tissue and causing swelling so that it protects the tissue. And you want to experience the pain, because when you suppress the pain, you're also suppressing those pathways that are bringing in white blood cells. They're bringing in platelets. They're bringing in chemoattractants that bring in the cells that do the repair work. So all of these things we have been recommending in the RICE protocol, and including compression and elevation, all the things we've been doing have been done without scientific basis, other than to say they're really good at controlling the pain and stopping the inflammation. That's true. They are really good at stopping pain and inflammation. But even the Mayo Clinic admits that inflammation is the body's healing mechanism. So these aren't my words. They're not Hahnemann words. They're the Mayo Clinic's words. So why would anyone want to stop inflammation after an acute illness? If you have a chronic problem that no one can get to and you can't reverse it, you can't resolve it, by all means, use anti-inflammatories, use foods and a diet that's anti-inflammatory, because you're talking about reducing pain by reducing inflammation. But in an acute injury, we're not talking about major car injuries. We're talking about sprains, even broken bones, things like that, muscle tears, at least for the orthopedic side of things. Every aspect of inflammation, which is, redness, pain, swelling, heat, and loss of function, all of those things are therapeutic. And when you block any of them, you slow healing and you delay healing. And the science demonstrates it. It shows this. It's when you look, you're finding out all of these things interfere. But as a society, we've been trained that pain is bad and no one should ever have to experience pain, and that goes back to the pregnancy discussion we had just a brief while ago, that, pain, we've all heard no pain, no gain. And we take it very superficially, but it's literally true that pain is part of an inflammatory process, and it's part of the innate immune system. The immune system is what's responsible for inflammation. You can't get inflammation if you have no immune system. So, and in an acute injury or even an acute infection, if you fight inflammation, you delay recovery, period. And the science shows it. And that happens to be what homeopaths have been saying for 230 years in a different language. And that's why I'm so turned on, because when I see the science support what we've already been doing, what we've already known homeopathically, we didn't know why so much. We just knew from experience that works. And Hahnemann wrote in the Organon, he's got one of the footnotes about burns that you mentioned, that, conventionally we treat burns with cold water or ice. And this is devastating. This almost forces the body to have a long-lasting injury. And Hahnemann has a little footnote in there that says something like, the well-seasoned cook knows that the scalded hand is best treated by bringing it close, not into, but close to the fire, and does not heed the immediate increase in pain. And this is really critical, because he's aware that pain and increasing pain is part of a healing process, and that suppressing pain is very dangerous for many reasons. We also know conventionally that when you suppress pain, you have no idea if you're causing further injury.
Well, I have
Yeah.
an example of myself, the appendix again, because I never take painkillers ever, haven't for years. And when I had this abdominal pain, I went presented to the hospital, and they gave me some paracetamol. And then half an hour later, while I was waiting for somebody to see me, half an hour later, my pain was gone. So I went home. And in that time period of like going home and then the pain came back the next day, then it had actually ruptured. So if I had not taken the paracetamol, but this is the other thing when you go to hospital, they're very quick. They almost force you to have painkillers. And when my daughter had pneumonia, I did my best with homeopathy, and it was actually a long story, but she ended up in hospital because I just thought, okay, it's probably at the stage now where she needs antibiotics. Her first ever antibiotics at 10 years age, 10 years old. I was gutted, absolutely gutted, but I was like, okay, this is just past the point. I've done everything I could. So first ever round of antibiotics at 10. But while we were there, they kept on pushing painkillers on her. And the thing in Australia, and I don't know about how many other countries, but if you don't do what the doctors say, they're very quick to take your child away from her and put them in child protection services and all that sort of stuff. So I had to be really careful how I said to the doctor that, you were actually the guy that 3 years ago when I was here, you gave me a painkiller. It took my pain away, and because of that, my appendix ruptured and I could have died. So the reason I don't want to give her a painkiller is not because I'm a bad mother, but because I need to be able to gauge how she's going. Is she getting better? Is she getting worse? Where is the pain? Is it moving? Because if you're asking her questions, but you've just taken her pain away, how can she answer you about where the pain is? So you said something
Yeah.
else really powerful that just
Yeah.
light just went on for me. I'd heard this before about our mitochondria in our cells actually developing from bacteria, and that the link between the mitochondria and the bacteria, but it's kind of just like dawned on me that with the mRNA vaccines, the COVID vaccines, they did tests of people of their microbiome before and after the vaccine, and it was found that within something like 2 weeks, 95% of their bifidobacteria had died off after the COVID vaccine. So I can't remember who the lady's name was. It was a medical doctor. She did this research, but it's just suddenly when you said about that link, it made sense to me as to why that would have been.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why that research is so important. And, I'm not anti-science by any sense of the word. I am so pro-science, but I want to see all the science and I want to see the right questions asked, not just the questions about what happens in the first 5 minutes or the first hour after you give a treatment. What's the long period time delay? And Michael Frost, are you familiar with Frost?
No.
He's a homeopath in Vienna, Austria, who has published several really important studies, his research in the hospital setting. And he did a study in the intensive care unit in a hospital in Vienna, and it was a double-blinded study. Not the physicians knew, not the patients knew. And he did it in the intensive care unit where patients were suffering from extreme sepsis, which is a disease with a very high mortality rate. And they had, I forget how many patients were part of the clinical trial, but they looked at the survival rate at 1 month and then at 6 months time period. And as I said, no one knew who was getting the homeopathic medicine, but there was an improvement in survival that was not significant, but it was an improved survival, like 75% survival versus 65% survival, favoring homeopathy after 1 month. But at 6 months, so literally 6 months or 5 months after they were discharged, there was a significant survival rate of like 85% versus 65%. In other words, that at 6 months time period, which no one had been looking at, you could see a favorable response to homeopathy. And this is something we don't do in the conventional field. We just look at, well, did they get out faster than the other person? Or did the pain get relieved faster than the other person? Not like how many recurrences were there? What was their long-term outcome? We ignore that because we're trying to bring a drug to market. We're trying to get a lot of money out of that patent for the drug. And it gets swept under the carpet. If they do it, they don't report it. So he's someone who's really kind of looked at it. But unfortunately, they took that data and turned it against him. And they said, well, this is irrelevant. This just shows that homeopathy can't work because we know that how could a treatment given 6 months earlier be affecting you today? Because in conventional medicine, it's not possible. Well, it is, but usually in a negative way.
Yeah.
But so when you look at the science, you really can see remarkable things. You also mentioned the power that a physician has over you when you're in the emergency room. And this is really unfortunate that I assumed it was just in the United States that the American Medical Association and other organizations like that, they hold so much sway.
Same here.
You can get reported for child abuse and neglect. You can lose custody of your children if you disagree with what they're doing or you're trying to protect
We
your
have
kids.
cases here of children who've been taken away because their parents refused cancer treatment or even just asked a second opinion. A child's been taken
Same
away.
here.
Yeah.
Same here. So you've taken a branch of medicine that was basically different from homeopathy as a political organization. It was never differentiated scientifically, never on the basis of which therapy was more effective. It was purely an ideological and a financial system. The AMA, American Medical Association, is a trade organization. It's not a scientific organization. It's a trade organization, and their primary goal is to protect the practices of their members. That's what they're in it for. And they've gotten so much power that everyone is scared of them.
Mm.
And this is now what is dictating medicine. We're seeing this at so many levels right now.
And this is something that you also speak with authority on because you have been president and on the board of so many different homeopathic regulatory bodies and advising Americans for homeopathy choice. And I know there's all sorts of other things happening. And that's actually how recently I saw you in a Zoom and I'm like, oh, quickly message you. I've been meaning to get you on the podcast for years. So I think I'm going to have to get you back on the podcast if you're okay with that, Ron. And then I would love for us one day to, whenever you're ready, to just have a really in-depth talk about what's happening with homeopathy and the FDA. I know there's some things happening that, we can't publicly talk about yet, but there's all sorts of things in the background happening. But it'd be really great if you can come on at some stage and just talk a bit more because you've been so involved. And are you still a president of one of the organizations? I know you've been involved with as president or vice president or advisory person for so many different homeopathic organizations for so many years.
Probably not that many, but I was president of the Homeopathic Medical Society of the state of New York for a number of years. And then later on, I was president of the American Institute of Homeopathy, which, by the way, is the oldest continuously operated national medical association in America.
Wow.
And it was founded before the American Medical Association.
Was it 1838 or something?
1844. We were founded the same year that the Faculty of Homeopathy in the United Kingdom was founded.
Oh, wow.
Without any communication between the two groups at the time, we both came to life a year after Hahnemann passed.
So before emails.
1843.
So you couldn't email each other and say, hey, let's do this.
Right. It was just divine inspiration, I suppose.
It is, yeah.
And then now Americans for Homeopathy Choice, I advise them.
Is there some sort of homeopathic, how the homeopathic remedies are made type thing? I think I saw you on a board or something for that as well.
The American Institute of Homeopathy put together a group called the NHPCB, or the National Homeopathic Product Certification Board. And this was to provide, on a voluntary basis, to provide a certification and a seal to manufacturers making homeopathic medicines so that we would externally testify that they've done it the right way. We have run into some snags because the question became, well, what standards should they be held to? And so we're now in the process of developing an open consensus process with using members from the entire homeopathic community here in the United States to agree on a set of standards that will be certified by the American National Standards Institute. many organizations and many industries choose to have national standards. And it's kind of remarkable that the homeopathic product industry has never done this before. There are different standards that exist, but nothing that's been ever developed through an open consensus process. And so we're hoping that over the next 2 years, we will be able to produce standards that are unique for homeopathic medicines. Right now, the FDA is holding the homeopathic industry to conventional drug standards, that you have to meet all the sterility and quality and documentation issues that manufacturers of conventional drugs have to meet, which is absurd when you think about how different our products are and how we're not killing people like Tylenol is killing people. We're not killing anyone, yet we're being told these are the standards that you have to do or take to the highway. You're not going to market your product. So we're working on a lot of fronts right now to try to carve a niche for homeopathic medicines in this country, and also to provide a legal basis by which the FDA will regulate them appropriately.
I did a reel on Instagram just this week, actually, and it was information I got from the CDC's website that over 100,000 people were killed by pharmaceutical medicine in 2023 in America alone. And that was, from stimulants and opioids and things like that. And then I just said at the end of the reel, and nobody's ever died from homeopathic medicines in 250 years. Isn't that mind-blowing? Like, why isn't that blasted across everywhere else? But then I also read that I didn't realize, because I've had Kathleen Shibley on about the Homeopathic Political Action Committee, and I didn't realize that you actually were part of the people who started that as well.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so my question is actually, how do you do all of this and still stay so vital and youthful and doing everything that you do? What's your secret?
Who says I'm vital?
You look very vital.
We'll bring my wife in and see what she says.
Okay.
No, I can only say that I wouldn't do it if it were anything other than homeopathy. That, to me, it's one of the most important things there is. And it's such a tragedy and a travesty that it's not available to more people, that more people aren't aware of it. Even if it were just for one simple condition, they're not aware of it. And this is not accidental. This is by design. And this is a well-planned and a well-executed map that's been followed by the powers that be. And we're now at a point of crisis where these organizations are digging themselves so deep into the ground, and they're still saying there's no alternative to what they do. And what they're doing they're still saying it's the best thing, when every indication is the opposite. So for me, I couldn't sleep at night if I wasn't doing something about it. So I just try not to spread myself too thin and try to do what I can. And as a result, you can't do everything. It's just not possible. And I'd love to publish a book, but who's got the time to do that in addition,
I was going to ask you, because I feel somebody like you is the perfect person to write a book. That's something that I would actually want to read with all your...
Thank you. I just need a sponsor to, cover my expenses for 3 months.
Send you to a tropical island for a few months to go write your book.
I'll take a closet. You don't have to send me to
Ron, is there anything else that you really want to get across today, or that you want to share with our audience, or any final messages that you want to leave us with?
Well, yeah, let me just say again that, as everything I've said about the microbiome is so important and is so critical to understanding and putting into perspective in science, when you practice homeopathy, you are practicing in complete consistency with the microbiome.
Love that.
So you don't have to change anything to be compatible with it. You're already doing it. And you don't have to get off of this track and learn about the microbiome. You don't. You're already using the most microbiome compatible system of therapy there is on the planet. Okay. And that would be the final word. You're already doing what you need to do. Just keep learning how to do homeopathy better. Just keep learning, to expand what you do, because we all have things we don't know how to treat or we can't treat. And mostly it's because we just need that experience of going through it.
That is a powerful message. Thank you. I think the homeopaths are going to be really relieved that they don't have to go learn something else. They've already doing it. You're already doing the right thing. Keep doing it and double down on what you're doing.
Exactly.
And for our listeners, go check out homeopathicmd.com. And I love your email when you said you don't do social media or secret handshakes or anything else. So just go to homeopathicmd.com. And thank you so much for everything that you do for homeopathy, Ron, and for the incredible information that you've shared with our listeners today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Eugenie. It's been my pleasure. And just let me know if you want me back. I'll be happy to.
Thank you. Talk
Yeah.
soon. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.